What are some solved mysteries? The McStay family disappearance and murders. In February of 2010, the McStays, a family of four, Mom Summer, Dad Joseph, and sons Johnny and Joseph Jr., seemingly vanished from their home abruptly. A carton of eggs was left open on the counter and the family dogs were still outside in the backyard. The scene was eerie and complicated because the home the McStays lived in was in the process of being renovated, so a neat and orderly home wasn't the norm at this stage. It appeared there was missing furniture and the usual mess that comes with construction, some freshly painted or redone surfaces mixed with older versions. From the outside, it appeared the family just took off. Neighbor had surveillance that captured what appeared to be the bottom of the family SUV leaving the driveway. Since they were living in California, the border to Mexico wasn't far and authorities found footage of what appeared to be the McStays walking into Mexico with their two little boys in tow. The family SUV was found abandoned in a mall parking lot near the Mexico border. 3 years passed before the bodies of the McStays were found buried in shallow graves in the California desert. The bodies appeared to be in advanced decomposition and there were signs of blunt force trauma. A sledgehammer was also found buried with one of the bodies. Chase Merritt, a business partner to Joseph McStay, was arrested and charged with their murders on November 5, 2014. His trial was delayed for years until 2019. He was sentenced to death. Motive: Chase had a gambling addiction and had been and continued embezzling money from the business. His DNA was found in the McStays' abandoned vehicle. He bludgeoned this beautiful family to death for money. Another science mystery: back in the 1800s, evolution theorists had predicted the age of the Earth to be several million years, since this would have been necessary for the current life forms to have evolved. But Kelvin, the #1 superstar of physics at the time, had used thermodynamics to calculate the age of the Earth based on the temperature of its insides, and he said it was quite a bit younger. This was a mystery for many years, and was considered one of the major flaws of then-current evolution theory. It was not until the early 1900s they found the answer: radioactivity. Decays of uranium and other radioactive elements are heating up the Earth, so the cooling takes longer than expected. The biologists were right all along. But when the scientists who made the discovery were about to present their findings, who's sitting at the back of the lecture room? It's Kelvin. Now an old man, he's still alive and has come to watch their presentation. They were terrified at the idea of having to stand in front of the Lord of Physics himself and basically explain why he was wrong. But to their great relief, he immediately fell asleep. I think about this when I myself fall asleep in physics class. It happens to the best of us. (1947) and British South American Airways aircraft named Stardust disappeared. Its last message was simply, Stendek. After an exhausting search, no trace of the aircraft was found. For years conspiracy theories and talk of alien abduction by wackos circulated. Till 1998, when mountain climbers on a remote mountain found an engine, pieces of metal, and clothing at the bottom of a glacier on the side of Mount Tupungato. Turns out the aircraft got caught flying the wrong way in the jet stream while it was flying at night and using a system of timing when to start their descent. Being in the jet stream reduced their airspeed in relation to the Earth and they smacked themselves straight into the side of a mountain, after which an avalanche covered the wreckage. The wreckage took decades to flow down the side of the mount with the glaciers. The glacier preserved the wreck so well that 50 years later the recovery team found identifiable remains, personal items, and could read serial numbers on the engines. Amazing, one of the landing gear tires was still inflated, and that teams continued to visit the site for periodically as more of the aircraft, cargo, and remains of passengers are still emerging from the ice. The Andreen McDonald case. She and her husband Andre, yes, Andreen and Andre, originally were from Jamaica. They moved up to my town in Texas, where Andre was Air Force and Andreen was a bodybuilding business owner. Andre was pretty jealous that Andreen was more successful and was constantly begging/demanding that she make him co-owner of her company. She always said no. One day he had it, and did away with her. The gym that she frequented, every single morning, got concerned when she stopped showing up. She was very close with the ladies that she worked out with, and even gave them a key to her house. She told them that if she ever went missing, that her husband probably did it, and they knew he had an attitude. So one day, while Andre was out, the ladies went to check on Andreen. Her car was there, her wallet was there, but she wasn't. They found blood and hair in her bathroom. That's when cops were called. Cops showed up when Andre was home and asked about Andreen. He said she was in the hospital. They asked him, if she's in the hospital, how come her wallet's here? He responded simply, talk to my lawyer. They got a warrant and were able to search the house further. Saw more leftover evidence in the bathroom, and evidence of clothes had been found burned in the fire pit in the backyard. But no body. So all they could do was charge him with a missing persons deal. Andre was super snarky about it too. How he'd be proven innocent. How the cops would never catch on. Little did he realize how loved Andreen was. And how much Texas ranchers hate corrupt and snarky murderers. Crowds gathered daily and were given permission to sweep over ranchers' land for any sign of Andreen's body. Just as crowds started feeling defeated, and Andre started to see hope of being released, a rancher was scoping his field. He had heard coyotes out and went to see what could have enticed them. Sure enough, he found human bones, later identified as Andreen. So yeah, proper charges were able to be filed. Jidis and the Land of Ta. A few years ago, 2017, comedian Nate Fernald posted a tweet of an enamel pin he had bought of a familiar-looking friendly monster with the word Jidis written under it. He was unable to find any information on what Jidis is, and the mystery took the internet by storm. The mystery kept growing as someone found a sticker of Jidis alongside other characters all listed as the Land of Ta. The sticker sheet was from a company called Denison. There were no Google results at all for either Jidis or the Land of Ta. With multiple people researching, that was where the mystery was left off, and people kind of forgot about it. But a couple years later it was solved. A podcast was made where they investigated the mystery, got a hold of the former art director of Denison back in the 80s who referred them to a few potential artists, and they found the daughter of one of the artists who had passed away, and in her father's stuff was the original pencil drawings of the creators of the Land of Ta. It was never anything but those stickers. This internet mystery still appeared on lists for a while as unsolved. The only mystery left is who made the enamel pins, which is still a mystery, but not quite as big as, who is this character and this land that seems familiar, but that there's no record of. Sarah Yarborough was a teenager a few doors down who watched over us on several occasions when we were young kids. She was murdered and dumped in a bush at the high school like a piece of trash, and it was absolutely devastating. It wasn't a small town, but when it happens to your neighbor, it is very much in your sphere of awareness. Everyone was scared. I remember the media circus at the home, the eventual tapering off of said circus, and the family moving away to get away from the undoubtedly bad memories and constant reminders their kid was murdered and the killer was still out there and on the loose. It turned into a cold case. Every now and then, I looked for news of an update even though I grew up and moved away. I did this for years, decades even, because it always bothered me as an early childhood memory. A couple years ago, I finally saw a local news report that DNA evidence and genealogy databases led to the arrest of the murderer. For me, that was an emotional moment of getting closure, and I can't imagine the magnitude of emotions and fresh wounds felt by the parents having learned that nearly 30 years later, the investigation on the cold case paid off. The Golden State Killer/East Area Rapist, Joseph James DeAngelo. A former police officer, who was sacked for burglary, and mechanic. American serial rapist, murderer, burglar. Committed at least 13 murders, 50 rapes and over 100 burglaries between 1973 to 1986. I was listening to the 6-part podcast called Case File and they hadn't yet caught the suspect. But a year or so ago they finally got him after collecting DNA evidence and he put a tissue in the bin outside. It was a confirmed match. Edited to add as I just did a brief summary. Although it's been covered in the comments by me and a few others, I'll add here for clarification. He was caught a few days over 3 years ago. Time flies. He was only a cop for a short time before getting sacked. He was found shoplifting at store for supplies, like a hammer, dog repellent, at that time and not robbing a house. He left semen as evidence. Because he wasn't uploaded into the database or caught beforehand, there was no DNA match in the system. The way they got onto him as a suspect before gathering hard evidence of the tissue was a familiar match uploaded onto GenMatch by what was a 3-4th cousin of his. The officers in charge of case then went through 1,000 DNA profiles from his tree to finally narrow it down to him. They then swooped in to gather the tissue to get 100% clarity before the arrest. He was living with his daughter and 15-year-old granddaughter at the time of his arrest and was acting perfectly healthy and very fit for his age. When presenting to court, he was in a wheelchair and pretending to be senile. Such an act. He is also described by all his victims as having a very small penis. Unusually small. At crime scenes, he would pretend to talk to someone else. Go to the kitchen and make himself food or drink. Leave beer bottles at the site and go back to raping. He would break in and prepare the home before coming back a few days later to rape. By doing this, he would leave little objects, like guns or rope cut at certain lengths, and steal items. By then he would know the layout of the house. He would shine a torch in people's eyes to blind them. He'd often cry apologizing to his mummy or saying he wants his mummy. Other times he was cussing a woman named Bonnie. Before breaking in and raping, he would stalk and call the phone line several times. He would then call the victims after the rape and breathe heavily into the phone and/or whisper. There is audio of one of these calls. It's quite disturbing. He also went back to rape a victim. The disappearance of Flight KAL-007 in the 1980s. Headed from Alaska to South Korea, the flight took off as normal. In spite of multiple systems and scanners on the plan to ensure an accurate flight path, at some point it lost contact and eventually disappeared over the Pacific Ocean. It was searched for by Korea, the US and even Japan. No one could find anything. The flight was supposed to come close to USSR borders. The USSR refused search efforts within their borders, but offered to look themselves. Once civilian debris from the flight began washing up on Japan's shores, it was largely accepted that the plane had crashed. But why? How? The USSR claimed total innocence, until they couldn't any longer. We didn't get the full story of KAL-007 until the USSR fell in the 1990s, 10 years after the crash. It was then we were able to find out that not only did they know what happened, they were responsible. It's believed 007 was given the wrong coordinates before leaving the Alaskan airport. Coordinates so wrong, they ended up way off course and actually bouncing in and out of Soviet airspace. At this time it was the middle of the night. The Soviets believed it to be a spy plane sent by the US intentionally into their airspace. 2 fighter pilots were sent to check out the foreign plane, and ordered to give warning fire. At this same time, KAL-007 had requested permission from a Korean air station to fly higher to conserve fuel. It was the last contact anyone would have with them. When they went to fly up, a warning shot damaged the hydraulics that control the plane's movements. Suddenly, it was shooting up and down uncontrollably. This was the only sign the pilots had that anything was wrong at all. The fighter pilots following the plane, though having reported in that 007 had lights like a civilian aircraft, transcripts show they were told to basically shoot it down anyway. When the plane began moving erratically, the Soviet fighter launched a missile that struck the back of the passenger cabin. At more than 30,000 feet, people and items were basically sucked out like a vacuum. Nothing but warped body parts and luggage was strewn across the ocean for quite some distance. Records show the pilots and plane went down a distance later, near an island off the coast. Days later a search team found what was left. The USSR decided to cover it up and pretend they had no idea what had happened. For 10 years 230+ people's families had no idea what had happened to their loved ones. Truly awful, and I was surprised I had never heard of this case before. A civilian flight shot down by the USSR. With proof, they pretty much knew it was a civilian flight and didn't care. They had all the evidence, transcripts, 2 black boxes from the plane, the crash site, everything. And they lied and kept it a secret. I've become skeptical when police solve a serial killing. They are often under a lot of pressure to find the killer. They sometimes blame a bunch of killings on one guy. Had a documentary on Netflix, brain fart, can't recall the name of it, of a guy in Texas that confessed to the murder of a girl he was dating. She was wearing red panties, and the cops started calling it the red panty killer. He confessed, and then they asked him if he killed anyone else, and he said, lots. Word got around, and the sheriff and Texas Rangers would tell other agencies to bring the case file, strawberry milkshake and pack of Lucky Cigs, and the guy would talk. He confessed to a lot of killings. Someone got curious and did a map of all the killings, and when turned out it was physically impossible for him to be in all those places at the time of the killings. Sheriff and Rangers had a simple trick. They would give the guy the milkshake and cigs and tell the investigators from other states to give the guy a little time and then interview him. But they would leave the case file in the room with him all alone, and he would read the case file. They come in and ask questions, and he knows all about it. Case solved. In the end, it turned out his DNA was not on the panties of the girl he first confessed to killing, but some other guy's DNA is. But the sheriff, cops, Rangers consider all the cases to be closed. Rex McElroy. Over a good few years, he was an absolute piece of shit. Lived in Skidmore, Missouri. Groomer, rapist, married this 14-year-old girl who he gave Stockholm Syndrome to avoid rape charges, piece of shit lawyer to get him out of literal attempted murder, assault with a deadly weapon, etc. It was well known that he also stole cattle or something like that, but because of the shitty law system they couldn't do anything about it without direct proof. Oh, did I forget to mention that he had kids with this 14-year-old? One of his crappy kids tried to steal some candy from a store in 1980-ish. The store owner, who was 70, caught this kid, so Rex started stalking the family who owned the store, coming to their house and just standing in front, making threats and all. In a confrontation he tried to blow the owner's head off. Ernest Bowenkamp, the owner, dodged and had his neck grazed, and he was quite hurt, but alive. Finally he was caught for this and found guilty of attempted murder, but bailed because he was rich. People would literally leave whenever he entered a bar. He bullied a sheriff into stepping down from his job, and was constantly loaded with money, buying new trucks all the time. Well, eventually people got tired of this shit. Dozens of people followed him into the bar. McElroy finished his drink, went back out. As he started the car, an unknown amount of people opened fire on the bastard, absolutely destroying him. As a matter of fact, they wanted him dead so bad they found revolver casings on the ground, meaning someone had enough time to reload an entire revolver. There were numerous shooters, and the Stockholm wife called out one shooter, but every other person there, around 50 people, said that they saw nothing, and hell some even said they heard nothing. So yeah, Bastard was dead after near a damn decade of ruining this little town. Investigation was concluded with nobody charged, no proper testification, nobody sentenced. But we all know it were the townsfolk, and McElroy deserved it.
Thanks for watching. Subscribe for more.